Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of November. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the West Ukraine region. As you can see, there are at least two icons in this area. The first one is located on the territory of Poland. This is the town where, according to the information we have, let's say some Polish tractor was attacked by some rocket. As a result of that attack, two farmers were killed. And there is another icon on the north of this area, on the border between Belarus and Ukraine. And this icon says that during the day, the Belarus forces were able to shut down the Ukrainian drone who were flying along the border. Maybe he was trying to find some information or something like this, or to find some evidence that that attack on the drones, on the tractor that we saw yesterday, was made by the Russians or by the Belarus force or something like this. If we're talking about today, there are at least two versions of the situation that happened yesterday. According to the Ukrainian sources, that tractor was shut down by the Russians. And the Russians are saying that they didn't attack the territory. There is a buffer in 25 kilometers between the territory of Poland and Ukraine, and deep in Ukraine, that the Russians are not sending their rockets to. And the Russians were saying that that tractor was attacked by missile from S-300 system. If you ask me, I believe that I understand that everybody understands this, that tractor was attacked by the Ukrainian S-300 missile, and it was a mistake. Of course, we understand that. But the thing is not about this situation. Of course, two civilians were killed as a result of the attack. It's a very bad thing, bad situation, and we can understand this. The worst thing from that situation is that Ukrainian authorities started lying. Everybody understood, everybody understand that that was an attack of the Russian missile, that there is no evidence how to prove this situation, but the Ukrainian authorities, in head of Zelensky, were trying to lie and were trying to force NATO countries and the Western countries to be involved in this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and they were forcing the Western countries to attack the Russians or to revenge for this situation. If we're talking about the Russians, of course, this is a very big benefit for the Russians, very nice opportunity for the Russians, because now the Russians are able to, every single time when the Ukrainians are saying something or trying to blame the Russians for something, they are able to remind the Ukrainians about the situation in this village in Poland and say that time you were lying, why should the West world and the countries believe you right now? Believe me, on the diplomacy level, on the political level, Zelensky lied, and believe me, nobody will forgive him this situation. Nobody will forgive, because he shouldn't do like this. He shouldn't do like this. He should wait for some investigation, and after investigation, he could do his own notes and speech and something like this. But he decided to lie from the very beginning, and this is a very bad sign for the Ukrainians. Another bad sign for the Western countries and for the Russian, and very good benefit for the Russians, is that, I'm not sure what conclusions you draw from that situation. But if you ask me, one thing became clear to me. Western countries lack determination. It's obviously. If we were talking about, let's say, the middle of the 20th century, when there were USSR and, let's say, United States of America, I believe that this situation with the killed Poland civilians wouldn't pass like that. As I told you, the Western countries lack determination. They should have reacted, and this is the thing that Zelensky wanted to force the Western countries to do. But we saw no reaction at all. Just some kind of talks. Everybody blamed the Russians, that everybody understand that was some kind of Ukrainian rocket, but it was the fault of the Russians because they started this war, something like this. So why is this situation good for the Russians? Because they saw how the Western countries react. And now they understand that if there is no evidence from any kind of situation, that means that the Russians are able to do anything on the territory of the Western countries. Let's say the Russians now are able, let's say, to take some kind of air defense rockets from the territory west of Ukraine that were supplied and supported by the Western countries, somehow to transfer those rockets on the territory of Europe and to shut down civilian airplane. And in this case, nobody will be able to blame the Russians. And nobody will be able to start any kind of reaction. You see that? And this is the talks about, this is what the Russians are warning Western countries all the time, to stop support Ukraine. Because sooner or later, this weapon might get into wrong hands. And this is exactly what the Russians are trying to say by this speech. Of course, they're not threatening to the Western countries like in front that we're going to shut down your planes or destroy civilian infrastructure or something like this. But this situation with Poland farmers and with the rockets and the reaction of Western countries to this situation show the Russians that now they're able to do everything. The most important thing, to hide, to kill the witnesses and not to leave any evidence of any attack on the Western countries. And this is a very nice benefit for the Russians, because now, let's say if there are going to be some kind of terror on the territory of Western countries with the usage of the weapon that were supplying support to Western Ukraine, nobody will be able to blame the Russians, because we saw and we heard a lot about the situation with the black market of the weapon and so on. And the Russians are always able to say that wasn't me. We always reported to you about this situation, and this weapon, let's say that some kind of terrorist got this weapon from the black market and something like this. So the situation is very bad, and the main benefits from this situation, Russian goes the best benefits. And if we're talking about the West countries, they lost this small battle. There were no battle, no clashes, but the Western country lost this situation. Now let's move to the front lines. The front lines gave us a lot of updates during the previous 24 hours. And the main thing that the Russians now included another front line. If you remember, like months ago, we had 4 front lines from the Russian Ministry of Defense report. It was Kherson, South Donetsk, Kupiansk, and Kremenaya front lines, or Liman front line. And if we're talking about today, the Russians removed the Kherson front line because there are no heavy clashes in this area, and the Russians added Donetsk front line. From now on, there are 2 Donetsk front lines: South Donetsk front line, this one, and Donetsk front line itself. There is at least another front line, Bakhmut front line, but as you know, Bakhmut are stormed by Wagner forces, and Wagner forces is not responsible or are not under control of the Ministry of Defense. It's like separate organization who has separate contracts. And when the Ministry of Defense report about the losses and so on, they don't include the numbers from Bakhmut, because Bakhmut is not the zone of their responsibility. So we don't know the numbers about this area and so on. So we have 2 Donetsk front lines, South one and Donetsk itself. If we're talking about South Donetsk front line, as you can see, the Russians haven't started any offensive operation. They didn't make any attempt of that. But the Russians reported that as a result of heavy clashes on the South Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost around 65 soldiers and 10 armored vehicles. If you take a look at this map, you're going to see that Ukrainians made one attempt in direction of their attack in direction of Stepnoye, this one. Let's take a look at the Western sources map, and we're gonna see I have updated this map with the blue cloud. This blue cloud shows that this territory is under Russian control according to the Russian source map. This town Salotka, like Vladimirovka, Blagodatna, Mikoyskaya, Pavlovka is under Russian control according to the Western sources map. This town still considered as the territory under Ukraine control. If we take a look at the map of deployment map, we're going to see that this map shows the same situation as Russian source map shows. The only difference is about Pavlovka. According to the deployment map, this town is still, or at least is in the gray zone. So the Ukrainians, according to the report, were trying to attack in the direction of Stepnoye. So let's mark this area with the arrow. And I understand that there are a lot of opportunities, chances for the Ukrainians to attack all over the front lines. but all these attacks may be just a useless waste of time, manpower, and so on. So the Ukrainians calculated the situation and they understood that the main area the Ukrainians need to attack is Stepnoe. If you take a look at this map, you're going to see that there is a black line, the railroad moves to Alenivka. After that, there is no black line, and after that, black line starts somewhere near Pilna, near Vladimirovka, this one. So the area between these two lines without any black line, saying that there are no railroad. But this is not true. As you can see, after 2014, this red line is the border of DPR as a result of 2014-2015 battles situation. And after that, the Ukrainians cut the railroad in this area, and they cut the supply of, they cut the connection with the Donbass area, with the DPR and LPR. But if you take a look at the West Russian source map, you're going to see that there used to be a railroad, and there is a railroad in this area. So if we're talking about the map, this railroad was deleted from this map. But if we're talking about the real situation, there are still railroad in this area that moves from Stepnoe. And using this railroad and using this regular road, the Russians are supplying and supporting their army in this town, like Volnovakha, Novoandreevka, Valerianova, this Russian garrison in this area, who these days are trying to penetrate the Ukrainian defense orders, who are trying to storm Ugledar and just to take the south, just who is fighting on the South Donetsk front line. So the Ukrainians understand if they are able to cut Stepnoe to take control of this town or to establish fire control, with help of this they will be able to reduce the supply and support of the Russians, and of course with help of this they will be able to ruin the Russians' plan to develop their offensive operation in the South Donetsk front line. So this is the situation about the Ukrainians. And furthermore, this is not the first attack. During the previous weeks, I believe that Ukrainians made maybe 4 or 5 attempts in this area. All those attacks were repulsed. But I understand that if we're talking about the Ukrainians, this is the focal point and the area that they want to establish control over. And this is the area that will determine the success of upcoming grand battle for the South Donetsk region. Now we are moving to Donetsk front line. Donetsk front line started from, let's say, Opытne Vodyane, and this front line ends somewhere at Kurdyumovka. So Kurdyumovka is still the, let's say, the Donetsk front line, and after Donetsk it's the area of Wagner's responsibilities. The Ukrainians made at least a few attempts of attack in this area. The first one, they were trying to attack from Krasnogorovka in direction of the north of Marinka, this one, because the Russians during the previous weeks managed to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense orders in the north of Marinka. In this area there is a river that split this town in 2 parts, and if the Russians want to develop their offensive operation, they need to attack with 2 different separate lines of attack, first one on the south and the second on the north. And of course you need to do this, you need to synchronize attacks, because if you're on the south, then the Ukrainians on the north are able to attack the forces on the south. If you're attacking from the north, then the Ukrainians from the south are able to attack the Russians from the north. So you need to attack together, synchronously, step by step. And if the Ukrainians want to stop the Russians, they need to attack the north part, this area, and to push them back, because if we're talking about the south, it's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians are able to do this, because Marinka is a very big fortification, but not for the Russians. Let's say that Ukrainians have nice fortification against the Ukrainians. Now we can say that the more the Russians take Marinka, the more fortification now is under their control, and it's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians do have manpower and just the power to attack the Russians in the south of Marinka. But if we're talking about the north, we understand that the Ukrainians controls the main part of fortification, and the Russians just have some, maybe these buildings and some trenches in the fields and so on. So this position are much weaker than position in the south. So that's why the Ukrainians were attacking from Krasnogorovka in this direction, trying to push the Russians back and to return control over the trenches in this area. But that attack was repulsed by the Russians. And there were a lot of very heavy clashes in the area between the Ukrainian, this bloc in Avdiivka and the trenches in Opotne. So, as if you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Russians changed a little bit their tactics. Now they're trying to move from Opotne as close as possible to this block of Avdiivka, trying to pin down the Ukrainians there, to pin them down, to freeze them, not to allow them to be flexible, mobile. And the main goal, the main purpose in this area is to shut down, to cut this road that connects Avdiivka and Severna. And as we know, the Russians managed to achieve some success during the previous weeks. So the Ukrainians made attempt of trying to attack the Opotne, trying to push the Russians back while they haven't prepared the real fortification trenches there. But the Russians reported that those attacks were repulsed by the Russians. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost around 160 soldiers and something around 11 armored vehicles. Now, the area that was included as a part of Donetsk frontline is Kurdyumovka, this one. These days, there are very heavy clashes for these fortifications and trenches. As you can see, these areas in the gray zone, and I believe that the Russians have almost completed the clearing operation of these trenches. And by taking these trenches, we can say that the battle for Kurdyumovka has started. But the thing is that Ukrainians made another counteroffensive operation trying to break the situation, or at least to win some time in this area. All those attacks were repulsed as well. From Kurdyumovka to Staromykhailovka, Krasnogorovka were repulsed, and the Ukrainians lost 160 soldiers and something around 11 armored vehicles. Now we are moving to Liman frontline. This map shows no changes, but the Russians reported that if we're talking about Liman, the Ukrainians made another attempt. They lost around 100 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles. The same story, the same picture, the same towns: Plashanovka, Chervonopopovka, Makiivka. And if we're talking about the south area, we can say that Ukrainians achieved some success. They established some kind of stable bridgehead in this area, and now the Ukrainian forces on the north need to hurry up a little bit and to develop their position, and after that Ukrainians will be able to start the final battle for Svatovo, trying to attack this town from the north and from the south. As you can see on the south, there are no icons, but there are a lot of icons on the north. The Ukrainians were attacking in the direction of Kalemychiha. They were trying to attack in the direction of Kuzyomovka, and so on. And if we're talking about this area, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers, around 16 armored vehicles, and something around 3 artillery systems. Furthermore, if we're talking about this area, these days we're receiving a report from Slavyansk. There was a photo and video confirmation. The locals were saying that they saw the endless number of forces of armored vehicles on the railroad stations, and I believe that that was some kind of forces from Kherson district that were redeployed from this area to Slavyansk to reinforce, to rotate the forces, the Ukrainian forces on this front line, trying to increase the pressure, trying to increase the manpower in this area, and trying to break the situation near Svatovo. So we'll see what is going to be next in this area. But for now, as you can see, the front lines are stable. There are very heavy clashes, but the front lines are stable. Zelensky is not going to start any negotiation process. And the final one, let's discuss one more time Kherson. As you can see, the Ukrainians continue attacking the south of this territory. This is the only road that we can say safe road. We can't call this road safe, but at least I believe that the Russians has more chances to survive using this road to supply and support the west part of Kherson district, southwest part. And the Ukrainians are attacking this area regularly, attacking with HIMARS and so on, trying to reduce the Russian supply and support. Situation is not so good, and believe me, one day the Russians will decide not to support this area anymore, and at that very moment the Ukrainians will start another storm operation of this of the southwest part of Kherson, and they will take the bridgehead in this area. I believe we can start counting day anyway. It's a fact, and that fact that is going to happen. I believe so, that the Ukrainians will be able and the Russians won't be able to stop the Ukrainians in this area. I don't think that Ukrainians have possibilities to develop offensive operation from this area, because they are able to send light infantry, but I'm not sure about their capabilities of sending armored vehicles, tanks and artillery on this side of the Dnieper River. I'm not sure about this. But to have bridgehead and to have some number of commanders and scouts is a very good job, because from that moment the Ukrainians will be able to send their commanders and scouts to the territory of Crimea, to the territory in back of the Russian forces who is located along the Dnieper River, and these forces will be able to reduce the Russian supply support and even forces and so on. So there are going to be a lot of updates from this area in the future, I believe so. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds me to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.